Hi, I'm Scott Humphrey, CEO of the World Floor Covering Association, and this is Leadership Live. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving last week and took some time to think about the things that you have to be grateful for. This week, I want to talk to you about a word that many leaders push away from. They really don't want this to represent their leadership style, but I will tell you that the teams and the people and the individuals that look to them for leadership really appreciate the word consistency. They want consistency in their leaders. And oftentimes we see leaders represented as those who you really wonder what's going to happen next. You really can't figure them out. And some people like to keep their teams on edge because they think it keeps them more creative. I will tell you, it tends to work just the opposite. Your team needs to understand who you are, how you'll react, and that's where the word consistency falls in. So 4 areas where consistency is vital and important. I'm sure there are more. And again, next year when I go alphabetically through leadership, I'll probably hit on consistency again. But for today, here are 4 things that come to mind. You need to be consistent in your expectation. If you lay out the guidelines of what you expect your employees to do, you need to be consistent in the praise that you give them for meeting that expectation. If they begin to meet the standard or to exceed the standard and there is no praise, then that lack of consistency is a demotivator for them to do and be more. Be consistent in your expectation, especially as it relates to praise. Secondly, be consistent in your attitude. It is vitally important to your team that they understand who's coming into the office each day or who they're interacting with or who's riding along with them each day. They need to understand how that person is going to respond and react. Now listen, attitude will be one of the first letters that I touch on next year when we go alphabetically through leadership. But I'll tell you, it's one of the things you can choose to control. Michael Abershoff, who you see, and we've been talking about the captain of the Benfold who turned that ship around, he tells the story of his team began to identify his crew, whether it was going to be a good or a bad day, and interacting with him based on how much sleep he had gotten the night before. If he had to get up multiple times, they would spread a rumor that went through the whole ship that not to cross him that day because his attitude was going to be wrong. And one day, one of the gentlemen walked up and said, "Hey, Captain, I hear it's going to be a rough day today." And he began to understand that the lack of consistency was impacting his crew. And so he understood the value of letting people know who you are on a daily basis. That doesn't mean you can't have a bad day. It just means let a bad day be the outlier. Don't let one day be good, one day be bad. You choose what type of day you want to have. Listen, I have many issues that I deal with in my life from a personal basis, a community basis, a work basis. If issue goes wrong in one of those, I can let that bog me down, or I can choose to focus on the things that are going right in every other area. Third, be consistent in your communication. Let your team know how they're doing. Let your children know how they're doing. Let your spouse know how they're doing in your relationship. If there's something more that you want, if there's an expectation that's not being met, make sure you communicate that. Because if you do that only at the beginning of the year, because it's when you're laying out what the expectation is, but you don't give them any more communication until you're evaluating them at the end of the year, they begin to wonder if you're satisfied. I can tell you as a CEO of an association who really works for a board, if I don't hear from my board on a regular basis, my assumption is I think things are okay, but maybe they're not because I'm not hearing from anybody. And so those couple of times that we meet each year to review where our business is, to go over budget and get approval, those are vitally important to me because those are the times I get to communicate with them and understand, are they satisfied with my performance? Be consistent with your communication. Last, but certainly not least, especially for your team, be consistent with your discipline. What I mean is, if you let some people slide or not meet the standard, but you expect the standard of everybody else, you have lost all credibility with your team. They want to know what is the expectation, and are you going to be consistent with everyone at the team, or are you going to play favorites? And when you begin to play favorites, you create a disloyalty among your team, which causes them to look to somewhere where they can find loyalty. This is not a good time to be losing employees. So make sure that the way you discipline, that the way you interact is consistent. Let me hit them one more time. You're consistent in your expectations, especially as it relates to praise. You're consistent with your attitude and the way that you interact and the way that you just communicate with your team each day. And that's number 3. And then finally, number 4, be consistent with your discipline. Let people know where they stand, not just when there's a problem, but make sure that the standard is consistent among all your employees, that there are no favorites. Listen, maybe not the most glamorous word in leadership, but it's a vital word to your team. Be consistent in your leadership, and then go out there and lead.